A Fistmas Carol. Tooth Smasher was dead, to begin with. There was absolutely no doubt whatsoever about that, for Kronan had slain him personally with his extraordinary stabbiness. Pushing up daisies, he was no longer pining for the fjords, nor taking a quick breather or break. Old Toofy was as dead as a doornail. So 'twas passing rather odd that he appeared as he did before the very eyes of Kronan. Now the Cunning One, Kronan, would usually eye up the discarded Humie takeaway boxes festooned across his quarters, or even check to see if he was running a temperature, or eye up the mushrooms provided by his apothecarian, Hippocrates. But, to his eternal chagrin, Kronan was getting used to this sort of apparitional spooky shtick. And so it was, that through bored, heavy-lidded half-moon eyes, that Kronan bogged at the invading ectoplasmic ephemera. Before him was the indisputable image of his erstwhile rival and arch-enemy, Tooth Smasher, big boss of the Speedwar. But Kronan had dispatched him quite some time ago now, to prove his bona fides and to rouse some form of reaction from the Cunning One. Toofy reclaimed control of his own arm. The one hacked off and attached to Kronan in a macabre and messy transplant. The left arm of Kronan immediately balled into a fist and rammed itself repeatedly into the orc boss's face. As he was leaning on his right arm, he was temporarily defenseless. The huge fist pummeled Kronan until he rolled onto his back and freed his right arm, which caught the left, and Kronan was wrestling with his own arm, which slipped out of his clutches and did a horribly strong and sharp scratch right between the cheeks. Kronan winced as he gained control of the arm and glared at the guffawing ghost of Tooth Smasher. But the look said it all, as Toofy laughed louder for a moment, then released control of the arm. He now had Kronan's attention. "Bold warrior of Mork, this very night you shall be visited by 3 ghosts," started Toofy. Kronan sighed. "You must listen to them, Kronan, or risk suffering my fate." Kronan then generously indicated his understanding of the message by extending a figure of, agreement. But Toofy just shrugged and said, "One will be from the past, one from today, and one from the future." "I still think you're a twat," mumbled the apparition as it faded. Kronan rolled over and slept deep and well. The feeling was indeed mutual, but Kronan took the trouble to cuff his left arm to the bed, just in case. Morn came, and all around Kronan were gratingly chirpy. His guards were prepared before he strode out. His meetings were swift and economical, giving him no real time to dish out a pasting. The war was going so well. None could understand Kronan's, gnarliness. Personally, he couldn't understand it either. Why was he so empty inside? Everything was turning out great, but he missed something. Now everyone around him was so chipper because they knew that look, knew his patterns. Their lord, Kronan Da Kunnin, was about to do something weird again. They could feel it. So they waited, watching, enwrapped. Kronan got through the day's business, working poor happy Len hard, as Len was standing in for Hippocrates today. Tiddle's pet Grot now had yet another master, and hence he was bone-tired most days, each master getting a mere half-day of exertion from him. Poor wee blighter. Kronan then worked out and grabbed extra weapons to stash around his room. Then he went to bed, but fully clothed. He knew these oddie spirits could be intensely weird and deeply inconvenient. Kronan woke to a crashing sound as the ghost set off his simple line trap. A stand fell over, and Kronan leapt to his feet instantly, which was a good thing, as he was instantly assailed by a horrific wee fairy with extra long stabbers for claws. much like the ones from Chaos, but greener and sturdier. The fairy flew towards Kronan, who backhanded it, and it slammed into the bulkhead. A great green splat mark trailed as it slid down the wall. It groaned as it hit the floor, starfishing onto its back. And of course, Kronan helpfully stepped on it. The crunching sound was satisfying to him. But as he lifted his boot to look at his handiwork, Kronan jumped backwards as a tiny fairy exploded in size into a strapping lad even bigger than he. Its bruised left eye could barely open, and it slammed its left shoulder against the bulkhead to pop the arm back in. "That hurt," growled the huge Orky, whose dainty wings have not increased in size. You know, the crushed wings. "You piece of shit," said the fairy, but grinding its teeth, it continued. "I is the spirit of the past. I will show you a better time." With that, he tried to unfurl and flutter his wings, while stretching out one hand to the Cunning One. Kronan sighed, but gave up and took the proffered hand, and off they floated, through a huge wobbly door above them, going back to a better time. The white bathing and blinding them retreated, and they stood on his spot, overlooking Kronan's village. Kronan remembered this day so well. It was the day he got really angry for the first time, like actually really livid, and went on his very first rampage. The day he went from youth to boy, and was firmly on the pathway to being made a knob. The Orky fairy pointed down, and the perception of Kronan and the fairy followed bodily, and now they were stood amongst the very action, close range to watch. A younger Kronan going berserk, so angry he'd not even needed or thought to pick up a chopper or shooter. He just snarled at the snots, grots, herds and squigs and cuffed them down hard, and they shot away from him. Then on into the first orcs. Kronan's haymaker took the first off his feet, instantly knocking it out. But Kronan continued on fast, hitting the next orc's face with a series of quick sledgehammer hard shots. He walked over that one and bound onto the next Orky, butting it hard and only staggering while his opponent was out for the count. And on it went. Kronan was a veritable whirling dervish of fists and feet. The green fairy beamed at the brawling and at Kronan, who found himself sagely nodding at his own enthusiasm, if not panache. The younger Kronan took out 7 more boys before being pacified by 4 knobs jumping him, then giving him a good kicking on the ground. A tear in his eye, Kronan wasn't sure what the message was, but he really enjoyed this so far. The green fairy then nodded to Kronan and whispered, "Remember what you've just remembered. The orc is the weapon." Kronan looked blankly at it, as if to say, "What are you dribbling on about?" He was, as we know, very expressive. The fairy just winked and then tapped the side of its nose with a single finger, as if in some in-joke between the two of them. But Kronan was utterly none the wiser. The lesson seemed to have been learnt. Now, seeing as it's a very laboured one-trick pony, instead of tedious soul-searching betwixt visages, the image of the great green fairy dissolved, and the next ghost entered stage left. White bathing light surrounded Kronan, and then it turned to red. Kronan now stood on the bridge of his mightiest vessel, the Orcs of Omen. The thing next to him, the new spirit, was a huge orc. More like an ogrin stood beside him as he looked on. "I is the spirit of the present," it blurted. "I is here to show us what is wrong." Drew the huge apparition, and with that, time went fast forward, the vision accelerating again and again. As Kronan sat on his bridge, sitting in his chair, Orkies moved around Kronan like wasps then, as speed moved on, like wisps, darting in and out around him. Kronan interacted with all of them, as each had come to him with some problem. But during the viewing, Kronan could see the huge apparition looking dolefully as this continued. He slowly closed his eyes and shook his lowering head, no longer wishing to see, as Kronan watched himself running the entire waaagh, but not moving. For days on end, he was trapped. His command chair, his mighty thong, was indeed his very own prison. Kronan turned his back on the vision, and there was the ghost of the present, now looking at how hard Happy Len worked, and worked. No time to himself between Hypocrates, Kronan, and Tiddles. Then poor Phyllis, Kronan's head-thinking grot, hovered into view, joining the vision. Both Happy Len and Phyllis trudged so slowly to their bunks, beaten, bedraggled, broken. The vision froze as they went to sleep with growling bellies, for neither had been afforded the time to even eat. And Kronan looked on in shame at the poor buggers. The large spirit next to him shook his head and grimaced at Kronan, with an equally explanatory expression that stated, "You son of a bitch." The ghost and tableau faded, and a cold breeze struck every pore of the Cunning One. The final ghost was a thing of dark billowing cloaks. Not that this remotely fazed Kronan, but most might let out a tiny bit of wee when he bore down on them. It was rather intimidating. But don't think of it as a willowy thing. No. This was a beefy, bench-pressing ghost who really put on the pounds. Proper orky. Kronan felt tasty, liked his chances, but didn't want to elongate the process really, so he didn't take a swipe at the apparition. And anyway, Kronan thought he understood already. But this one was to hammer the issue home. To be fair, orcs were in the mix, so repetition seemed to be prudent for the information to be absorbed. Kronan now looked on as the vision changed. Some knobs were talking about his accuracy with a shooter. Others extolled how he was fantastic with a chopper. And on it went. They commended his cool head while admiraling a fleet void action. And of course, his astonishing talent at finding new entertainment. And of course, his cunning. But none talked of his individual orky artness. Not one. Because most people he'd done over were dead, shooter fodder or choppered to pieces. And Kronan finally, truly absorbed the message. He nodded to the spectral horror and winked with that gotcha mate snap. And both Kronan and the orky death figure high-fived, and then Kronan truly opened his real eyes. He awoke and sprang from his bed. 'Twas the morning of Fistmas. He rushed outside and then laid directly into his bodyguards. Not a chopper nor shotter held he, as Kronan belted not just 3, not just 7, but a festive 30 shades out of all of them. Kronan charged across the alleys of the ship, belting anyone who crossed his path or slowed him down. A veritable carpet of unconscious orcs heralded his passage and path to the comms arrays. Kronan pelted inside the room and duffed over the scant crew there with good 4-knuckle sandwiches. He grabbed the loudhailer and opened comms to the entire waaagh fleet, and declared the high holiday of Fistmas was to commence immediately. It had been so long since Thinkmas. This was the reason for his dejection and his deeply odd feeling of emptiness. His religious calendar had been rather lacking, or simply non-existent. But now, he had been moved by the second part of the dual divinity of the orcs. Thinkmas was fit for Mork, the god of cunning brutality. Today would be Fistmas. It would be for Gork, the god of brutal cunning. And Kronan declared that no chopper nor shooter could be used this day. Not even sticks, which was rather strange. All would be fisting. The entire fleet would fist each other as hard as they could. Or punch. Punch would have probably been a better way of putting it, but I got carried away in the moment. and the entire waaagh then downed tools with exuberance and jubilation as they all indulged in raucous and rambunctious fisticuffs. A phrase broke out in every quarter of the fleet, and Kronan was not done yet, as he bounded and bashed his way to the grot quarters. He rolled inside and scooped up Happy Len and Phyllis, and then he slapped and stomped his way to the mech boy zone. Kronan went through the doors and dumped both grots in the newest killer cans he could find. Both would be customized and enhanced endlessly in the future, but for today, they both had big fists attached to their walkers, and both Happy Len and Phyllis could join Kronan in his rampage. Fistmas was a huge success, and a great time had by all, even the snots. And by night's end, all the bruised and beaten orkies were now drinking grog and singing Fistmas carols. Tomorrow, those few really odd orkies who had not been decked would then be set up in one-on-one fights. It would be Boxing Day. And thus satisfied and deeply happy, the entire waaagh went to bed. Very, very happy. The end. Or something like that. And a very Merry Christmas from myself, Mrs. B, and Lightbringer. And we all hope that you have a very happy new year. Just remember, do try to make some time for fun. Merry Christmas. Toodaloo.